Hey y'all, Leela with Kreations. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how I created this glittered reverse ombre tumbler. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. And if you like this tumbler, I do have my tumblers posted on my website, misskisskreations.com, where you can order yours, and I also sell UV DTF decals. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. This tumbler design, I am using a 20-ounce skinny from Makerflow Crafts. I am using an 80 grit sanding block to sand this tumbler. Once I finish sanding this tumbler, I'm using 91% alcohol to wipe around the tumbler to remove any of my excess oils and sanding dust that may have been placed on the tumbler. This is the prepping process I do for every tumbler before I design it. This is a glitter tumbler, so I always set up my catch paper before I start glittering my tumbler just to have my surface set up. I am using Glitter Heart Co's Biscotti and Autumn Breeze. I do have a 10% off code, MissKiss, and I will be using Adhesive Apothecary Cauldron Colors, and I also have my MissKiss code for 10% off. These cauldron colors from Adhesive Apothecary, it's a 3-in-1 paint, primer, and adhesive. You can paint your tumbler, prime it while you're painting it, and while it's still wet, you add the glitter. So I really love using these colors, and these colors are very vibrant. They aren't really transparent, so you really only need one coat of the color. I purchased this color last year, and I haven't used it in either 12 months or maybe 11 months, and this color is still good. One tip I do have for these colors, make sure you are shaking the bottle very well before applying your colors to your tumbler. And I am using a Wet n Wild makeup brush. I did purchase that from Amazon. I will be linking that brush in my description below. I start with my top color, which is that nice goldish orange color. This looks like a Reese's Pieces right now. So I always start from the top, and then I use the other color and I start from the bottom, and I just basically marry those two together. Ombreing a tumbler to me is just back and forth, adding your colors one color at a time and just really taking your time. If you notice, I have my tumbler slanted at an angle as much as I can, so whenever I place those glitters on the tumbler, those glitters kind of cascade down the tumbler, gravity takes over, and so it kind of fades into the other color, and I go back and forth with adding the colors to the tumbler. So after I placed my orange color onto my tumbler, after this placement, I took my catch paper with the orange and I accidentally placed the orange color glitter into the maroon color, and I mixed those colors together on accident, but it's okay. I ended up placing another order with Glitter Heart Co, so I got the color back in time, but I was just distracted. Don't do what I do. Here I am just finishing up my ombre, just trying to really marry those colors together, and this does not have to be perfect because once we put the reverse ombre on top of this ombre, it really does blend together. And you notice that it's not directly in the middle of the tumbler. I tried to make it in the middle, but it's okay. Like I said, it will all come together at the end. Right after I place my glitter on my tumbler, I take my tumbler outside and I spray one coat of my Kreations crystal clear acrylic coating. I let that sit for 15 minutes, and then I spray a next coat of my Kreations crystal clear acrylic coating. I spray 2 coats of this. After my second coat, I let this dry for about 25 to 30 minutes before applying my epoxy. You want to make sure this is completely dried, because if you apply epoxy over this wet sealant, then the epoxy is going to go on foggy and it's not going to be clear epoxy. The reason why we use this before we epoxy our tumbler is so those glitters can be locked into place, so those glitters won't move around while you epoxy your tumbler. So I'll let this dry for about 25-30 minutes, and then we'll move on to epoxying our tumbler. And for my first coat of epoxy, I am using Flynn Sister Supply Shop Artist Cure Epoxy. I do have a 10% off code as well. All of my codes are MissKiss. I am using a total of 30 mLs of epoxy. That's 15 mLs part A and 15 mLs part B. You can use Flynn Sister Supply Shop fast cure epoxy, but I was already epoxying tumblers, so I had this epoxy already mixed, so I chose to use this epoxy. I'm going to let this tumbler spin on the cup turner for about 4 hours, turn off my cup turner, let my tumbler air dry or air cure for another 20 hours, with a total dry or cure time of 24 hours before moving on to the next step. You want to make sure your epoxy is completely cured before moving on to the next step, because we are going to be applying some tape and then removing the tape, and you don't want to remove that uncured epoxy once you remove that tape from the tumbler. And here's my tumbler once the epoxy is completely dried or cured. I am using a 220 grit sanding block to sand very lightly on this tumbler, just to remove any of those little bumps that may have been added while I epoxy the tumbler. And then I am using my 91% alcohol to wipe away any of that dust. Now we are going to place some painter's tape on the tumbler. This tape is 0.75 inch, and I will have this tape linked in my description below for you to purchase. The reason why I'm using 0.75 inch is because it's really the only size I have on hand, so I'm just making it work. This part is actually really easy. It does seem complicated if you haven't done it, but like I said, it's very easy. What you're going to do is place one piece of tape down on the tumbler, place a second piece of tape, and then a third piece of tape, and they're going to be right next to each other as straight as you can make them. Once you have your third piece of tape laid down on your tumbler like you see I have, you're going to remove that middle piece, and that's going to be the spot where you will eventually glitter. Then you will repeat that process. So I am basically using that middle piece of tape as basically a template to make my future lines, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do this process again, get a third piece of tape, place it down. Once that tape has been placed on my tumbler, I am then going to remove that middle piece, and then those are going to be how I place my stripes on the tumbler. Like I said, it does seem very difficult if you're just looking at the cup, but it's really not that difficult if you just take your time and do it, and then it kind of starts making sense in your head. These tumblers are like very trippy to look at sometimes, so it's like it's not normal to see like the reverse ombre look, but once you do it, you understand the process and they look kind of not trippy. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope it does. Maybe that's just my brain. Once I place the tape on the tumbler, and all of my tapes are placed on the tumbler, so like this last piece, the middle piece, I'll remove. I go around my tumbler and I try to make my pieces of tape as straight as I can. This part, do not overthink, because the minute you think one piece of tape is like crooked, you're going to think they're all crooked. So make sure when you place that very first piece down that it is as straight as you can make it, because if you have one crooked piece, they're all going to be crooked and it's not going to be straight. I then just take a small pair of scissors and I cut the excess tape from the bottom, because the bottom is just going to be glittered. It's not going to have anything fancy, but you can meet those tapes together, make a cool little swirl, however you want to do it. I placed my logo on the bottom, so it's not a big deal. And then make sure at the top of your tumbler, the tape is not tucked away into the tumbler. You want to make sure the tape is out of the cup, if that makes sense. You'll see me take the tape off now. You don't want those pieces of tape inside of the tumbler, because after you place your glitter, you're going to remove that tape. So it's just going to make the tape removal process a lot easier. So here I go, just picking up the pieces, and that's how you want the tape to be. Now that I'm satisfied with my tape placement, I put my tumbler arm inside of my tumbler and I take my 91% alcohol and I wipe around the tumbler, because I did touch the tumbler and I just want to make sure everything's off of that tumbler. I set up my catch paper again, and then I am applying epoxy for my adhesive for this application, and I'm using those colors again. Looking back at this process, I wish I would have used the cauldron colors again, because I forgot that I had brown underneath the original glitter, so that glitter changes color with the brown background. So now I have clear adhesive, which is my epoxy, and so the colors aren't exact. So when I place the colors on top of my original colors, it looks like I actually have 4 shades of colors and not 2. But really, it worked out in the long run, because it's still a really cute tumbler. But just FYI, whatever adhesive you use on your original base, if it is a color adhesive, make sure you use that on your second base. I am using about 5 to 7 mLs of epoxy on this step. I just want enough epoxy for that epoxy to act as my adhesive for my glitters. This part, again, is very easy. Again, it does get a little trippy, but it's okay. You apply those glitters the same way as you did the first step, but you're going to do it opposite. So where I place my orange glitters are going to be opposite of where I place my maroon glitters. So I'm placing the orange over the maroon and the maroon over the orange. It is easier to ombre the top layer because you already have basically that base layer down, and you're just trying to mirror that ombre that you've already created. Don't overthink that it's not in the middle of the tumbler. Like I said before, when I peel this tape up, you're going to see it really blends beautifully together and it turns out really pretty. So if you're not best at ombreing, or this just isn't your best ombre job, like this one I don't think is my best ombre job, but I think this cup still turned out really cute. Make sure you are applying this all over the tumbler. You're taking your time with blending those colors before you peel up that tape. Right after I finish applying my glitter, I peel that tape up immediately. I am using my epoxy, so I'm trying to take that tape off as soon as I can so the epoxy does not dry. And like I said, look how gorgeous that tumbler has turned out so far. I let my tumbler spin on the cup turner for about 4 hours or so, maybe like 2 to 4 hours. I just want enough drying time just to have that epoxy cured. And then I'm going to take my Krylon Crystal Clear for a second time and spray a couple coats on the place where I glittered, just so I have that glitter locked into place when I apply my epoxy over my tumbler. And now that my acrylic coating is dried, I'm going in with some epoxy. I am going to use some fast set epoxy for this step. You can use fast set or regular epoxy for any step of this process, whatever you have on hand. The measurements do not change. I am using a total of 20 mLs of epoxy. That's 10 mLs part A and 10 mLs part B, totaling 20 mLs of epoxy. I know this is going to be a thinner coat of epoxy, and that's okay. This is going to be my first of many final coats of epoxy, so I'd rather place a thin coat of epoxy twice than one thick coat, just to make sure my tumbler is nice and smooth at the end. So all you do is you apply your glitter the same way as you would any other tumbler. Just keep in mind that there are some spots where there's exposed glitter and there's some spots that aren't exposed glitter, meaning the bottom that's already epoxied and the glitter that you're epoxying over. Just want to be conscious that you are placing an even coat of epoxy on this tumbler and you're not pressing down harder on one area, so your tumbler is nice and smooth when you go to apply other coats of epoxy. Since this is my fast set epoxy, this coat took about 2 hours to be completely dried. I do live in Florida, so my humidity is really high and I do have ventilation in my room, so maybe that's why it takes a little shorter time than if somebody wasn't in a very humid and a hot environment. Once I was finished with this coat of epoxy, you will see that once this epoxy is cured, that there's some like bumps sticking up, so I wanted to add another coat of epoxy, and for this video that's going to be my final coat. So I would not place a decal on this tumbler yet until my tumbler is completely smooth. You never want to place a decal over your bumpy tumbler, because then you will see the bumps underneath your decal and it's not going to look cute. I'm going to add a HP theme to this because I think this screams HP. If you don't know what HP is, it's something I cannot show on YouTube and get paid for the video, so I cannot show you what it is on this video, but I will create a TikTok, Instagram post, and Facebook post, and you'll be able to see the final tumbler next week. And this tutorial was mostly made just for the reverse ombre. It wasn't made to show you how to decal or how to finish this tumbler off. If you do have any questions in reference to the next step of this tumbler, you can always post a comment and I can answer the questions, or you can always reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, or my TikTok channels. I have so many ideas for this style tumbler. I cannot wait until I show y'all my Christmas version. Just hang tight and just Trust me, I'm so excited for it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more Tumbler and craft videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.